I assure you that bombing of Qatar was not just about Israel wanting to bomb Qatar or kill the Hamas leaders that were there at the invitation of the US and Qatar and Egypt to deliberate the final touches of a ceasefire. It is unheard of that you actually bomb the negotiators. Put that aside. Put it aside. But why did Netanyahu and Israel choose to bomb them? Because they did not want a ceasefire. This whole argument.
Well, that was my take on it.
Of course it is.
It's like,
of course it is.
In this video, Piers Morgan gets schooled by this Palestinian diplomat on his own show. So Husam Zomlot doesn't just push back here, he just completely flips the narrative. While Piers just leans on this hostage framing to give Israel cover, Husam just calls out the deeper reality. Netanyahu and Israel bombed negotiators precisely to sabotage a ceasefire. That's not just reckless, it's a strategy to prolong the war. So make sure to watch till the end to see how Piers Morgan gets schooled by this Palestinian diplomat on his own show.
You cannot say you want a ceasefire and then try and murder all the people who are gathering to go over the plan for the ceasefire.
Of course it is. Why did Israel bomb Iran right in the middle of June, on the 12th of June, if I remember, for that 12 days of exchange? There was the UN conference that you saw only yesterday and the day before. It was supposed to be in June, where the world comes and resolve this issue. They go and bomb, so they derail, divert, and they did it again in Qatar. The policy, the strategy is no ceasefire. They are not interested in the hostages. I assure you, hostages would have been out long ago had we gone in the direction of the first ceasefire, let alone all the other proposals on the table. So why is Netanyahu doing this? And we need to understand the situation so we can actually find a solution. Netanyahu and Israel cannot stop this war. They will not stop this war unless forced. And that's why, right this moment, in the middle of a genocide, what we are busy with, Piers, is actually peace. We are so busy trying to go in a different direction than Netanyahu and Israel.
But why, look, the obvious thing that everybody comes back to on the pro-Israeli side and from the American administration is release the hostages. And to me, until or if Hamas come under enough pressure, probably from the Arab world to do this, to release those hostages, it will always give cover to Israel to say, this is why we can't stop. If the hostages got released and Israel continued to devastate Gaza, I think the world would turn even more against them very, very quickly. But a lot of people I speak to are conflicted because they say it's awful what's happening in Gaza. It's terrible how many civilians are being killed. But what about the hostages?
Do you think...
Why is there not more pressure internally
do you think
on Hamas to release these hostages?
Do you think since the 8th of October until today, almost 2 years, you think Israeli actions correspond to them wanting the hostages? Really? Seriously?
Well,
or even for that matter...
But that's not my point.
Or even for that matter, targeting Hamas?
No, but that wasn't the point I made. I actually believe, for what it's worth, and I said this to the ambassador, I actually believe that you should look at what people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have been saying and understand they have always had a bigger plan, which clearly now involves expelling Palestinians from their homes in the millions. And I view that as ethnic cleansing. So I've been clear about that. And I think people that warned that was the real plan from some of these ministers all along have been proven, I'm afraid, right.
So Husam just completely flips the energy here. Like, he's not just countering Piers, he's exposing the pattern. While Piers leans hard into the hostages narrative, which, let's be real, is the exact talking point Israel uses to justify bombing, Husam walks viewers through how Netanyahu's government has consistently derailed peace efforts. He cites Qatar, Iran, and even UN conferences to show a clear strategy: sabotage negotiations, keep the war going, and avoid a ceasefire at all costs. That's a brutal but reality-based indictment of Israeli policy. And notice how Piers tries to sound reasonable, saying, well, if Hamas released the hostages, Israel would have no excuse. But that's still a cover story. It assumes Israel wants the hostages back, which Husam undercuts by pointing out 2 years of actions that show otherwise. That's why this exchange feels so lopsided. Husam's bring receipts, while Piers is stuck in a loop about the hostages without realizing that line itself is part of Netanyahu's PR.
However, the point I was making to you, you haven't quite directly answered, because it's important, I think, that if Hamas released the hostages and Israel did not then have a ceasefire and did not show they wanted peace, I think the opprobrium against them from the world would be utterly overwhelming. But as long as those hostages remain in those tunnels, being tortured and being mistreated in the most cruel and barbaric way, it gives Israel the cover that they may well want for other things, but it gives them the cover. Why is there not more pressure internally from the Arab world to get Hamas to release the hostages?
Actually, what we know from the Qataris, the Egyptians, and our partners in the region, that very moment when the Hamas leaders were in Qatar, there was a significant amount of pressure on them to actually sign the American presented proposal. Boom! Netanyahu decided to completely and abruptly destroy that. And in any situations like this,
which I think was ridiculous and stupid. I mean, but the reason you've just articulated.
Because the last 2 years have been absolutely bluntly clear. And you and I have had many conversations about this. And you know, for many years, we were talking, but not heard. Not heard. And for many years and decades, we've been talking and not seen. So finally, we are being heard and seen. And I want you to know that from the very beginning, everything the Palestinian people and the Palestinian leadership have been doing is trying to sort this out in a statesman-like, with a vision. And I'm talking about from day one. Once the Nakba happened and our ethnic cleansing happened in 1948, you're talking about ethnic cleansing now. This is a pattern. The first political vision of the Palestinian people and the leadership at the time was one democratic state for all of the people, be it Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, be it Israeli Jews, one democratic state. And as we moved on, the argument from Israel and its allies, including the US, because the Palestinians might be more in number, because of the demographic threat, you see the racist side of that, Israel will never ever accept a one democratic state. They will never accept Palestinians to be part of that state because they will vote and will have the right to vote. And therefore, one day, a Palestinian by the name of Khalil will be the president. Okay. Down the line, we had to find a formula to actually achieve that end of the conflict and peace. And then the formula was the two-state solution. Many people think that the two-state solution is a Palestinian demand. Wrong. Wrong. The two-state solution was a Palestinian painful concession. Why? Because do you know that the 1967 borders that the ambassador was talking about now is 22% of the historic Palestine? And do you know that it's less than half of what the United Nations gave to the Palestinian state in 1947, the partition plan, resolution 181, yet still in 1988, the Palestinian leadership, Yasser Arafat, the late Yasser Arafat, the founder of our movement and the father of the nation, announced the establishment of a Palestinian state, declared on the 22%. Since then, we signed Oslo, and we have been so insisting on implementing that very painful compromise in every sense. And I've just heard the ambassador, the US ambassador, saying that Oslo stipulates that there will not be a Palestinian state. Really? An international law does not stipulate a Palestinian state. Seriously, this needs reality check. Oslo was an interim period for 5 years that must lead and yield a state of Palestine. That was the agreement. And we entered into these interim arrangements. In these 5 years, Israeli settlements in the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, quadrupled.
So while Piers just keeps hammering the hostage cover narrative, Husam pushes back with historical and political context that most mainstream hosts don't want to touch. He points out that the Arab mediators, Qatar, Egypt, even the Americans, had Hamas under pressure to sign a proposal. And who blew it up? Netanyahu. That directly undercuts Piers' point, because it shows Israel chose to derail the chance at a breakthrough. Then Husam shifts into history. The Nakba, the one-state vision, the painful concession of the two-state solution and how Israel still rejected it. That part lands hard because it reframes Palestinians not as obstructionists, but as the side that's already compromised again and again, while Israel expanded settlements and moved the goalposts. Meanwhile, Piers chose in a quick jab calling Netanyahu's move ridiculous and stupid, but Husam's point still stands here.
Today, in the middle of genocide, the most painful experience any nation can go through, genocide. What we are thinking about and acting towards is peace and is putting an end to all this. And what you saw in London 2 days ago, the announcement about the recognition of the state of Palestine, is part of our vision towards the future.
Okay, so but on that point, so it's a very significant week. Clearly, it's historic. But if Israel and the United States simply totally ignore it, particularly the United States, how meaningful is it? I mean, he was saying, the ambassador, it doesn't mean anything because they don't recognize it. You know, where does it get you? Where does it get the Palestinian people? Yes, okay, the UK has said we recognize the state of Palestine, but if the United States doesn't and Israel doesn't, how meaningful is it?
Well, I've heard President Trump many times saying that he really wants to be the man who make peace in the Middle East. He really wants to be the man to be remembered as the one who actually brought an end.
Which I'm sure is true.
Okay. So let's work on that, number one. Number two, that only Israel, and with it America, but the rest of the world is with you and I, Piers, is not a small measure. And remember the anti-apartheid movement. Remember the apartheid regime of South Africa. Actually, the last two countries that supported that regime was Israel and the US. And remember that once you have the rest of the world, including the UK, because the UK plays a significant role. You mentioned in your introduction that the UK, Britain, ruled Palestine in the time of the mandate, 1919 until 1948, and unfortunately have issued that Balfour Declaration that has cancelled us as a nation. And since then have been part of not preparing us for statehood, but of the Nakba of 1948. To come to a moment, and me personally as an ambassador, to be part of and witness this moment that the UK recognize the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and sovereignty over their land is not a small measure, and it is in the right direction. Because number one, it's about Britain more than it is about Palestine. It corrects history. It begins to correct history. It is a moment of leadership for Britain to say that, yes, we acknowledge the mistakes of the past and we shall right the wrongs. That's good for peace. And then from there, we move. This is merely the beginning. This is a foundational step on which we will build the peace up against the Smotrich and the Netanyahus and the Ben Gvirs. And I've been following some of your remarks of late, focusing on Smotrich and Ben Gvir. Please, Piers, this has been a successive Israeli governments who embrace the settlement enterprise. Let's not be reductionist and just reduce it to two individuals.
No, fair enough.
To do individuals.
Fair enough.
We need to bring that project to an end. The colonial expansionist project that believes they have a green card to bomb every single country around them. This has to end.
So wrapping this up, Husam closes this debate strong, laying out that the recognition of Palestine, even if ignored by Israel and the US, is still a historic leap toward correcting decades of injustice. He frames it not just as symbolic, but as Britain finally beginning to own its role in the past and shift history in the right direction. Meanwhile, Piers acts like it might be meaningless without US backing, which again kind of sidelines the point. International recognition builds legitimacy regardless of Washington's position. And at the end of the day, Husam is talking about peace, accountability, and dismantling a colonial project, while Piers is just stuck measuring the significance of recognition only through American approval. That difference says it all. One side is envisioning the future, and the other is just hung up on excuses. And when you see how Piers keeps circling back to hostage framing or US validation, it's less about balance and more about bias just creeping through. And speaking of bias,
are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.